The bell above the door of May's diner rang at 11:03 a.m. on a Thursday in late October, and nobody looked up. That was the thing about Millhaven, Texas, a town so flat you could watch your dog run away for 3 days. The doorbell rang 20 times a day for truckers and ranchers and county workers who had long since stopped removing their mud-caked boots at the entrance. Nobody looked up for any of them, and nobody looked up now. The woman who walked in was easy to overlook. She was slight, not fragile, but lean in the particular way of someone who had been without for stretches long enough to reshape the body into something efficient. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back, several strands loose at her jaw. Her jacket was olive drab canvas, worn thin at both elbows. Her boots were tan military-cut leather, so caked with the red dust of the highway that the original color was only guessable. She carried a single gray nylon pack with compression straps buckled tight, worn on one shoulder with the unconscious ease of someone who had carried similar weight long enough for the body to absorb it as normal. She paused just inside the doorway for 2 seconds. Nobody noticed those 2 seconds, but in them, her eyes moved across the entire room in a single unhurried arc. Counter, corner booths, kitchen pass-through, emergency exit beside the restrooms, the large window facing the main street. She registered every occupied seat. She clocked the 2 men in county uniforms at the back. She noted the elderly woman alone by the window, who was the only person in the room not staring at a phone or a plate. Then Wren Calloway walked to the counter and waited. May, 71, silver braid, the kind of face that had seen enough human nonsense to have stopped being surprised by it, came out wiping her hands on a dish towel and looked at the woman directly, without performance. "Help you?" "I saw the sign in the window," Wren said. Her voice was low and even, not quiet from shyness, but quiet the way a room is quiet when everything in it has been switched off. "Dishwasher, I can start today." May studied her. "You got somewhere to stay?" "I can work that out. $8 an hour, 6 days, 6 a.m. to 2, sometimes 3 if we get busy." She paused. "It's not much." "It's enough," Wren said. May nodded once, the way a woman nods when she has made a decision she knows will cause trouble with somebody. The trouble arrived in the form of Sheriff Dale Marorrow scraping his chair back from the corner booth, with the theatricality of a man who wants the room to know he is about to make a point. Marorrow was 6'2", broad through the chest, the kind of build that had been impressive at 30 and was still intimidating at 52, even with the weight redistributed. He wore his uniform the way some men wear a flag, not as clothing, but as declaration. His badge caught the overhead light as he crossed toward the counter, unhurried, coffee mug in hand like a prop. "I know this type," he said, loud enough for the full diner. Heads turned, conversation stilled. "You roll in off the highway, find the kindest face in town, work the sympathy angle. 2 weeks later you're gone and whoever trusted you is missing something. Money, tools, a sense of dignity." He let it land. "I've seen it more times than I care to count." Wren looked at him. She did not step back. She did not speak. She held his gaze with an expression so neutral it could have been mistaken for fear by someone who had never seen real calm before. Marorrow turned to the room at large. "This is Millhaven. We take care of our own here. Veterans, families, people who have earned their place." He looked back at Wren. "You haven't earned anything here, and you don't look like somebody who's contributed much anywhere." He paused for effect. "People who actually serve this country, people who actually sacrifice something, they don't look like you, sweetheart." The word landed like a hand on a wound. A woman near the window visibly winced. At the far end of the counter, an elderly man in a VFW cap stared down at his coffee. Wren said nothing for a long moment. Then, very quietly, "I just need the dishwashing job." Marorrow blinked, a flicker of frustration at not getting the reaction he had scripted. He made a sound that was half laugh, half dismissal, and the room gave him what he wanted. Laughter from Rex Beaumont's table in the corner, a nervous chuckle from somewhere near the window, the particular silence of people who disagree but do not say so. May said, "Kitchen's through there. I'll show you the back." Wren picked up her pack and followed without a word. In the back corner, Hattie Drummond, 63, widow of Sergeant First Class Harold Drummond, who had come home from Vietnam in 1973 and never entirely come back, sharp gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, had watched all of it from her window table without moving. She watched the new woman disappear through the kitchen door, and her eyes stayed on that doorway for a long time. The storage room behind the diner was 10 by 12 feet, exposed shelving, a utility sink, a bare bulb on a pull chain, the smell of industrial cleaner, and old cardboard. May showed Wren the cot against the far wall, and said she supposed Wren could use it until she found something proper. Wren thanked her without elaboration. That evening, she opened her pack with the systematic precision of someone performing a task they have performed hundreds of times. Clothes organized by category and compressed to tight rolls, a first aid kit in a waterproof pouch, a topographic map of Millhaven County with handwritten notations in the margins, a compass, a phone in a cracked case. At the very bottom of the pack, wrapped in a strip of cloth, was a small object the size of a $50 coin. She held it for a moment without looking at it, the way a person touches a scar without thinking, then rewrapped it and put it back. She folded the pack with the compression straps buckled in the exact sequence they had been buckled before. She laced her boots, tightened them, and lay back on the cot. From the front of the diner, through the wall, came the sound of Marorrow's voice, still at full volume, still performing for whoever was left. She closed her eyes. Bobby Crane, 17, lanky, perpetually in a faded Midland High School jacket he had outgrown 2 years ago, arrived the next morning at 6:05 a.m. and stood in the kitchen doorway watching Wren work the overnight stack before he remembered to say anything. "You're the new one," he said. "Bobby," May called from the front without looking up. "Stop standing and start prepping." He moved around Wren with a mumbled apology for existing and began pulling sheet pans from the low cabinet. He kept watching her sideways, with the particular curiosity of a teenager who finds something interesting and doesn't yet know how to pretend he hasn't noticed. What he was noticing, though he lacked the vocabulary for it, was her hands. Dishwashers' hands went soft from constant water, sometimes cracked at the knuckles. Hers were calloused in bands across the upper fingers, the kind of hard pads that formed from years of gripping something that was not a dish rack. The webbing between her right thumb and forefinger was slightly thickened. A faint, pale scar ran along the outside of her left forearm, old enough to have gone smooth. At 7:20 a.m., a man at table 4 dropped his steak knife. The clatter was sharp and sudden, and Wren, crossing behind the counter with a bus tub, moved. Not jumped, not flinched, moved. Her weight dropped perhaps 6 inches in an instant, her left foot angling 45 degrees, her eyes going not to the knife on the floor, but to the room, scanning it in one clean arc before her brain had apparently processed why. The whole thing took less than a second. Then she bent, picked up the knife, set it on the counter, and continued to the sink. Only Hattie Drummond had seen it. She turned her coffee cup in her hands and said nothing. By mid-morning, Rex Beaumont was back. Rex was 26, the kind of good-looking being slowly dismantled by poor decisions. Morrow's particular favorite since 8th grade, when he had been the fastest running back the county had seen in 15 years. The football was long gone. The favoritism had stayed. He came in with Daryl and Cody, took the big booth by the window, and when Wren came to clear the adjacent table, leaned out toward her. "Hey, May," he called, looking at Wren. "Where'd you find the new help? Highway on-ramp?" May didn't respond from behind the counter. Rex looked at Wren with the grin of someone who considers his own humor a gift to others. "No offense," he added, in the tone of a man who means complete offense. "What's your name, anyway? Where you from?" "What can I get you?" Wren said, still not looking at him. Rex sat back, mildly unsettled by the complete absence of reaction. Irritation he could work with. Total indifference was harder to perform against. "3 coffees," he said, "and a little less attitude." What Rex had not seen was what happened when she walked back to the counter. She chose the path that kept her back to the wall. She moved along the edge of the room, rather than across the center of it. She positioned herself at the one point behind the counter where she had a clear sight line to the front door, the hallway to the back, and both occupied table clusters. She was not thinking about it. It was simply where her feet took her, the way a river takes the lowest ground. Bobby watched her choose that position every single time she stopped moving. Always the wall, always the sight line. He thought about it while he chopped onions and could not explain why it made the hairs on his arms stand up. By early afternoon, Rex had organized what he privately thought of as a test. He leaned out of the booth when Wren came past and said, to the table, but at room volume, We should take a collection for the Memorial Service Fund. Show some community spirit, especially from newcomers who want to make a good impression. He said this in the particular tone that means the opposite of what it says. Wren looked at him. "How much?" she said. Rex blinked. He had not expected this answer. He had expected deflection, embarrassment, maybe a refusal he could use. "Well, 20? 30? Wren reached into her apron pocket and put $30 on the table without looking at it. Then she took out her order pad. "What can I get you?" she said. Not a question. Rex looked at the money. He had the expression of a man who has set a trap and watched the target walk over it without noticing it was there. Darryl leaned over. "Dude!" Rex picked up a menu. That evening, he lost a $200 bet to Darryl. He had wagered the drifter woman would be gone by Sunday. She was still here. She was wiping tables, stacking dishes, and moving through May's diner like something the room could not figure out how to process. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome. This channel tells the stories of real warriors, the ones who serve in silence, the ones nobody sees coming. If that's the kind of story you believe deserves to be told, hit subscribe right now and ring that bell. Because this story, it's only getting started. Wren Calloway just took the job, but the question nobody in that diner is asking yet is why. At 11:40 a.m., a man named Gerald Pruitt came in for his usual stool at the counter. Gerald was 68, Vietnam-era Navy, VFW cap, worn soft with age. He lowered himself onto the stool with the careful movement of someone whose knees had filed a formal complaint. May set down his coffee without being asked. Gerald watched Wren work the sink for a moment. Then quietly, to no one in particular, "She folds the dish towels different." May looked up. "Military fold, corners tucked." He paused. "I haven't seen that outside of barracks in a while." May glanced at the dish towels stacked beside the sink. Neat rectangles, corners precise. She refilled Gerald's cup and went back to the register without comment. At 12:30 p.m., a brown pickup went off the county road 200 yards from the diner's front window. By the time May reached the window to look, Wren was already outside. The driver, Carl, 40s, construction, thrown against the steering column, was in the ditch, right arm at a wrong angle, conscious but pale, breathing fast and shallow. Wren knelt beside him with the calm of someone solving a routine problem. She worked through the assessment in sequence, airway clear, breathing present and adequate. She checked his pulse at the wrist. 3 fingers, correct position, correct location, no hesitation, and moved to the fracture. She stripped her canvas jacket, tore a length from the hem of her shirt, pulled a stick from the roadside brush and a board from the truck bed, and built the splint without interrupting the flow of movement. Immobilization above and below the break, not positioned clear of the injury. Carl's face changed as the movement of bone was controlled. "Don't move it," she said. "Someone call 911. 3 phones were already out behind her. Deputy Cade Weiler arrived 2 minutes later and took in the scene. He was 38, lean, with a permanent squint from too much Texas sun and too little sleep. Marorrow's deputy in the truest sense, a man who had absorbed his superior's worldview uncritically and completely. "Who did the splint?" "She did," said the woman from table 7. Weiler looked at Wren. "You a medical professional?" "No." "Where'd you learn to do field work like that?" A half-beat pause. "YouTube," she said. Someone behind Weiler almost laughed. Weiler looked at the splint, correctly tensioned, competently built from roadside debris in under 4 minutes. And then at the woman who had built it. Something in him shifted from dismissal to a harder-to-categorize unease. He did not know what to do with unease, so he put it behind professional neutrality. "Paramedics are 3 minutes out. Stay put." He meant it for everyone. He was looking at Wren when he said it. She met his eyes. Then she walked back inside. Marorrow arrived that same afternoon with Weiler at his shoulder, his preferred formation, an architecture of authority, and said to Weiler, at a volume that was clearly meant for more than Weiler, "People without a fixed address, no lease, no employment history, no community ties. You know what that tells you about a person? Tells you they're not invested," Weiler said. "Tells you they're not trustworthy." Marorrow picked up his coffee. "Man or woman, doesn't matter. Transient lifestyle is a choice, and choices tell you things." He looked at Wren. You got a permanent address? She turned. Working on it. Marorrow repeated the phrase in the tone of a man tasting something off. Then, get me everything on a Wren Calloway, Texas ID. Already ran it, Weiler said. Army, Medical Corps, 6 years out in 2019. Medical discharge, clean record, nothing remarkable. Marorrow looked at Wren with the expression of a man who has been given permission to stop being curious. Army nurse, he said. Out on a medical? That explains the splint, explains the wandering. He turned away from her. Whole lot of nothing. Wren went back to organizing coffee filters. From his stool, Gerald Pruitt had heard every word. He had also spent 3 years as a Navy corpsman before his infantry service, and he knew the difference between a field splint built by a nurse and a field splint built by someone who had been in places where there were no nurses. He looked at the small, controlled woman at the coffee station and turned his cup slowly in his hands. He said nothing. The cot in the storage room lasted 3 more days. When Marorrow arrived with Trent Hollis, the commercial storage owner next door, permanently aggrieved, a man who had clearly been told what to say, the performance was transparent, health code issue, habitation in commercial storage space, liability concern. May looked at Hollis, then at Marorrow, who was inspecting his coffee with great interest. Wren had heard it from the kitchen. She was already packing when the sentence finished. 35 seconds, everything compressed and buckled in sequence. She came through the back door with her pack in hand. I'll find somewhere, she said to May. You'll sleep in the back booth, May said, in a tone that invited no counter-argument, her eyes on Hollis communicating the full extent of her opinion. Hollis left. Marorrow followed, coffee unfinished. Bobby watched Wren set her pack against the wall with the same unhurried precision, the same complete absence of complaint. Doesn't it bother you? He asked. Any of it, all of it. She pulled off her rubber gloves and turned them inside out. Yes, she said. No elaboration. She put on her apron and went back to work, and Bobby stood there with the particular unsettled feeling of someone given a completely honest answer that opens more questions than it closes. Hattie Drummond waited until the afternoon lull before she walked to the far end of the counter where Wren was wiping down and sat on the nearest stool without making a production of it. Harold always sat with his back to the wall, she said. Wren kept wiping. 30 years after he came home, never once sat where he couldn't see the door. Hattie paused. I used to think it was the war. Later I understood it was just him. The war only showed him something he already knew about himself. Wren stopped wiping. She did not turn around immediately. Then she did, and she looked at Hattie with that same flat expression. But something behind the eyes had shifted. A microscopic softening, the way a face changes when it hears something that fits. I'm sorry about your husband, she said. He died in '04, peacefully, which surprised him, I think. He'd spent a long time expecting it to go differently. Hattie held her gaze. You sit the same way he did, every time you stop moving. A long pause. Habit, Wren said. Hattie nodded slowly, as if habit were a perfectly satisfying explanation, and also no explanation at all. She picked up her coffee and moved back to her window table, and Wren watched her go. For a moment, something moved across her face. Not quite grief, not quite recognition, but in the neighborhood of both. Then Bobby dropped a sheet pan in the kitchen, and the sound snapped it clean off. Wren went back to the counter. That evening, Hattie sat with Gerald Pruitt on the bench by the front window, 2 coffees between them. They spoke quietly while the diner emptied around the dinner hour. Harold came home and didn't truly sleep for 3 years, Hattie said. Part of him was always on watch. Gerald nodded, turning his cap in his hands. There's a difference, though. Hattie looked through the window. Wren was visible at the counter, closing the coffee station with her characteristic precision. Harold knew what it was. He could name it. He'd say, I'm still in the jungle, and we both knew what that meant. She doesn't look lost in it. A pause. She looks like someone who chose to stay. Gerald watched Wren align the sugar dispensers, each one parallel, each precisely centered on its square of laminate, with the focused attention of someone for whom order was not habit but necessity. Army Medical Corps, he said slowly. That's what Weiler's file says. You can learn a field splint in medical training, Hattie said. But the way she looked at this room when she first walked in, the 2 seconds she stood in the doorway. Gerald paused. She wasn't taking into core. Hattie sipped her coffee. No, she said quietly. She wasn't. Travis Keene arrived the following afternoon with Rex and a purpose. Travis ran the county gun shop with the proprietary confidence of a man who considered himself the local authority on anything that fired a cartridge. He came in carrying something wrapped in a shop rag and set it on the counter with the deliberateness of a man making a performance of a gesture. He unwrapped it. A Beretta 9mm. Hammer back, barrel jammed. "Nobody can figure this out," Rex said to the room at large. "Travis has been at it all afternoon." Travis spread his hands theatrically. Frame's fine, magazine feeds clean, something in the action. A few people leaned over to look. Small town theater. Wren was bringing clean glasses from the back. She walked past the counter, and her eyes crossed the weapon in the instant of passing. Something changed in the set of her shoulders, a nearly imperceptible tightening, the way a person's body changes when it recognizes something familiar. She kept walking. Rex had been watching for exactly this. "Hey, you're Army, right? You know guns?" "I was support corps," she said, shelving glasses without turning. "I cooked." He tapped the counter. "Sure about that?" She turned and looked at the gun. 2 full seconds of silence. Bobby, at the pass-through window, held his breath without knowing why. "Recoil spring," Wren said, flat, certain. Travis blinked. "Come again?" "It's either worn out or installed backward. The slide isn't returning to battery after the cycle." She had not moved closer to it, had not touched it, had looked at it from 4 feet away for 2 seconds. Travis reached for the gun, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, disassembled the frame with practiced hands and found the recoil spring assembly. He stared at it for a long moment, then set it down on the counter without speaking. The spring was installed backward. The counter went quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something has happened that nobody knows how to categorize. "How did you—" Travis started. "I need to get back to the sink," Wren said. She walked through to the kitchen. Bobby scrambled back from the pass-through, trying to look busy. She pulled on her rubber gloves and ran the first plate under the water. He stared at the side of her face. "How did you know that?" "Lucky guess," she said. He looked at her hands again, the banded calluses, the padded grip webbing, the old scar on the left forearm, the way she stood at the sink with her back against the wall and both entries in her sightline. "That's not what a lucky guess looks like," he said. She handed him a stack of dried plates to shelve and didn't answer. Weiler pulled the VA records through a back-channel contact on Friday morning. A woman named Carmela, who had worked federal files for 16 years and owed him a favor. She called back in 40 minutes. "Cade," she said, "where did you pull this ID?" "Background check, local." A pause. "These redaction codes, do you know what they mean?" "Access denied. That's all I got back." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm going to give you some advice as a friend. Whatever this person told you or didn't tell you, leave it alone. File it. Forget it." A breath. "These codes are not administrative errors. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Weiler sat at his desk for a long time after the call ended, looking at the name on his screen. Wren Calloway. He picked up the phone to call Marorrow. He set it down. He picked it up again. Reed Harmon arrived in Millhaven on Friday afternoon in a rented truck from San Antonio. 58 years old, silver-haired, with a face shaped over decades into something that communicated authority the way a mountain communicates height, not through announcement, but through simple, unignorable presence. He wore civilian clothes and carried himself with the quietness of a man who has been the most dangerous person in too many rooms to feel the need to demonstrate it anymore. He was here for the Veterans Memorial Service scheduled for Sunday at the town square, where he had agreed to say a few words. He had a habit of saying yes to these requests, the small obligations of remembrance, the work of showing up for people who could not. He checked into the motor lodge on the county road and went to dinner at May's Diner, where he ordered the pot roast and settled into a booth in the back, and watched, not conspicuously. He was not a conspicuous man. But when the slight woman in the diner apron came past his table to clear the adjacent setting, something in his peripheral awareness registered, and he did not look at her directly. He watched her the way he had trained himself to watch things, without commitment, without obvious focus, the way you watch the edges of a room in low light. She moved wrong for a waitress, not awkwardly, precisely the opposite. She moved with a controlled economy that was specifically not civilian. The turns were too clean, the pauses too purposeful. The way she tracked the room without appearing to track the room, and the way she had positioned herself every single time she stopped moving, with her back to the nearest solid surface and clear lines to both exits. He had spent 28 years inside that walk. He recognized it the way he recognized certain scars, instantly and without needing to be told the story. He ate his pot roast, drank his coffee, did not once look at her directly during the 42 minutes he sat in that diner. When he left, he tipped clean and walked back to the motor lodge in the early dark. He sat on the edge of the motor lodge bed and thought for a long time about what he had seen. Bobby stayed late Saturday night helping May with the weekend prep, and somewhere in the rhythm of it, stacking, wiping, latching, he said, "Travis told his friend at the hardware store about the gun thing. Now people think you were ordnance in the army." Wren said. "Were you?" She set a clean cup on the shelf. "The file says what the file says." Bobby turned that over. He had grown up in Millhaven, which meant he had grown up around men and women who had served, and he had learned things from proximity that he could not have articulated. The way water learns the shape of a riverbed over time. He knew what people who had really been somewhere looked like when they talked about it, and what they looked like when they chose not to. His uncle had come back from Fallujah and gone very quiet in a way that sounded different from regular quietness, and Bobby had never had the vocabulary for the distinction until right now. "My uncle came back from Fallujah," he said carefully. He used to say, "The ones who really saw things, who did things, they don't talk about it. Not because they're hiding it, because it doesn't fit in regular talking." Wren put a dish towel on the counter, precise fold, corners aligned. She looked at him. For a moment, just one moment, something moved in her face that was not the controlled surface she wore in this place. Something older and heavier and more honest than anything she had shown since she walked through that door. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it was gone, as completely as if it had never been there. "Lock the back when you leave," she said, picked up her pack, and walked to the front booth. Bobby stood alone in the kitchen for a while. He could hear the October wind against the diner's back wall. He could hear faintly the flagpole in the square making its small metallic sound in the dark. He had the growing certainty, quiet and strange, like a compass needle finding north, that he was one of approximately 2 people in this town who understood that something at May's diner was not what it appeared to be. The other person was sitting in a motor lodge on the county road, not reading his paperback, thinking very carefully about what he had seen. Sunday morning came cold and bright. The sky, a hard winter blue, arrived 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The memorial service was set for 11 a.m. in the square, folding chairs in neat rows, bunting strung between the lampposts, a sound system humming with the feedback of equipment set by volunteers. Marorrow arrived at 9:30 in his dress uniform and came into May's for coffee. He looked at Wren behind the counter and said, "Full professional conduct from all staff today. This means a lot to people who actually have something invested here." He looked at Wren when he said, "People who actually have something invested." He was not being subtle. May said, without expression, "The diner will be open." Marorrow took his coffee outside, satisfied with himself. Gerald Pruitt settled onto his stool and watched the sheriff cross toward the square. His jaw tightened. 3 years, he said, to the air in front of him. Wren glanced at him. 3 years filing VA supplemental benefits. Every time I hit a wall, Weiler says the county coordinator hasn't processed it. Every time I ask the coordinator, she says the paperwork went to the sheriff's office. Every time I ask Marorrow, he says he never received anything. Gerald turned his cup slowly. The checks go somewhere. They just don't go to the people who earn them. Wren stood very still. "How many people?" she asked. Something in her voice had changed, still quiet, but with a precision to it that was different from politeness. The attention of someone recording information. 9 in Millhaven alone that I know of. Wren nodded once. She refilled his coffee and went back to the counter without another word. From the window, Bobby watched the square fill up. Rows of folding chairs, children running between adult legs, an October wind moving through the bunting. He watched Reed Harmon cross the square in civilian clothes, hands in his jacket pockets, heading toward the VFW staging area where the organizers were assembling. He watched Harmon pause at the edge of the square and look through May's front window. He watched Harmon's eyes find Wren, and he watched something happen in Harmon's face. Not recognition exactly, something more careful than that. The look of a man who has added up a column of numbers and found the total troubling in a way he has not fully decided what to do with yet. Bobby turned to look at Wren. She was aligning the napkin dispensers on the counter, parallel, centered, precise. He looked back at the square. He did not know yet what he was watching, but he had a feeling, strong and strange, the way a storm front feels before the weather turns, that everything in Millhaven, Texas was about to be very different. He was right. The square at the center of Millhaven had been arranged with the particular care of a community that understood ceremony as a form of honesty. 14 rows of folding chairs faced a portable stage draped in red, white, and blue bunting that moved softly in the October wind. On the stage, a single podium stood beside a framed display of 7 photographs, the veterans of Millhaven County who had died in the preceding year. An American flag had been planted in the ground at the stage's left edge, and it moved in the same wind as the bunting, slow and deliberate, as if it were keeping time with something. By 10:45 a.m., 35 people had gathered, families with children who were old enough to understand that they should be quiet and weren't quite, ranchers in clean hats, a cluster of men from the VFW post standing in a loose group near the stage, their posture carrying that particular straightness that does not entirely leave a man even decades after he has left the service. Bobby Crane stood at the edge of the square, in his Midland high jacket, his hands in his pockets, his phone in his right hand but not open. Gerald Pruitt had his usual VFW cap on, the soft one, and he had come early and taken a chair in the front row, which he had never done in 11 years of attending this service. He had always sat in the back. He sat in the front today, and he did not examine why. Hattie Drummond sat 3 seats down from him, her coat buttoned to the collar against the morning cold, her hands folded in her lap. Inside May's diner, the front window faced the square directly, and the view was clear. Wren Calloway had been watching through it since 10:30 a.m., while she set the post-service tables, sugar dispensers centered, salt and pepper aligned, menus squared against the table edges in the mechanical, unthinking precision that had become her signature in this place. She watched the square with the particular stillness of someone who was not watching casually, but processing. She watched Reed Harmon cross the square at 10:50 a.m. in his civilian clothes, hands in his jacket pockets, and position himself at the edge of the VFW group without fully joining it. He shook hands with 2 men. He declined a folding chair. He stood. And then, as if he felt the weight of being observed, he turned and looked through May's front window. He found her immediately. No searching, no scanning. Direct. Wren held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she turned and went back to the tables. Bobby, watching from the kitchen pass-through, had seen the whole exchange. He stood very still for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and put it back down. Marorrow arrived on the stage at 10:58 a.m. in his dress uniform, 5 rows of ribbons he had arranged with the assistance of a chart from the internet, 4 of which were awarded for administrative service and 1 for a single active duty deployment in the early 90s that had involved no combat. He carried himself up the stage steps with the gravity of a man who believes that the weight of an occasion can be borrowed by proximity. He greeted the VFW post commander. He shook hands with the mayor. He looked out at the assembled crowd with the satisfied expression of a man surveying something he considers partly his. At the edge of the crowd, Wren had come outside. She stood at the far right edge of the assembled chairs, behind the last row, her apron still on, arms folded, watching. There was no good reason for her to be there. She had tables to finish, prep to run. She was there anyway. Marorrow saw her. His expression did not change, but his eyes held on her for a moment longer than necessary before moving on. Reed Harmon, standing at the edge of the VFW group, had also seen her come out. He turned slightly, almost imperceptibly, to keep her in his sightline. The service began with a prayer from the local minister, followed by the flag folding ceremony, which was performed by 2 VFW members with the slow, practiced formality that turned a piece of fabric into something that carried the weight of names. The crowd was quiet throughout. Even the children felt it and went still. Then Marorrow stepped to the podium. He spoke well, in the way of a man who has given this speech, or a version of it, enough times to know where the pauses land. He talked about sacrifice. He talked about community. He talked about the men and women in those 7 photographs with a familiarity that was almost proprietary, as though their service reflected something about him. And then, with the particular timing of a man who had planned this, he looked out at the crowd and said, "Today I want to remind everyone what it means to earn a place in a community like this, what it means to actually give something, to have something invested." He paused. His eyes moved to the right edge of the crowd, to Wren. "Because not everyone who walks through our town has contributed. Not everyone has earned the right to stand here." Another pause. "I think most of you understand what I'm saying." The crowd did not shift exactly, but something in it changed, a ripple of awareness about who he was looking at. In the front row, Gerald Pruitt's jaw tightened. In her chair, Hattie Drummond's hands unfolded and refolded in her lap. At the VFW group's edge, Reed Harmon had gone very still. And at the far right of the crowd, Wren Calloway had not moved, had not looked away, had not changed her expression by any measurable degree. She stood with her arms folded and her back to the nearest wall of the building behind her, and she watched Marorrow at the podium with the attentive patience of someone waiting for something to finish. After Harmon's brief address, measured, precise, 3 minutes about the men he had served beside, and the particular quality of silence that follows the decision to serve, the formal portion of the service concluded and the crowd began to move. Families drifted toward the diner. The VFW men dispersed toward their vehicles. Children ran loose in the suddenly informal square. Harmon walked directly toward Wren. Not quickly, not with any visible urgency, but directly. The way a compass needle moves, without deliberation, because there is only one direction. He stopped beside her at the edge of the building, and they stood at a slight angle to each other, both looking at the dispersing crowd, not at each other. A passerby would have seen 2 people standing near a building, not necessarily together. "How long?" Harmon said. Low. Wren did not startle, did not turn. "Long enough?" A pause in which the wind moved through the bunting on the stage, and the flag kept its slow time. "Millhaven," Harmon said. Not a question. Something in the way he said it communicated that the word had weight beyond geography. 9 veterans with blocked benefits, Wren said, contracting fraud on the county mined reserves, 3 council members in the distribution chain. She paused. 9 days. Harmon absorbed this without visible reaction. "Cover stay intact?" "Until about 40 seconds from now," she said, and she angled her head almost imperceptibly toward the diner entrance, where Marorrow was walking toward them from the stage. Harmon turned, unhurried, to face the approaching sheriff. Marorrow had been watching the exchange from the stage steps with the particular alertness of a man whose instincts have been telling him something for several days, and who has chosen, until this moment, to ignore them. He came toward them with the performance of casual authority, the deliberate walk, the hand on the belt, the expression that said the square belonged to him. "Colonel Harmon," he said, "fine address, we appreciate you coming out." His eyes moved to Wren. "And I believe you need to be getting back inside. Service crowd's going to start coming in for lunch and May will need—" "Actually," Harmon said, "I was hoping to get a cup of coffee, if that's all right." Marorrow blinked. The interruption had been so smooth and so unremarkable that it took him a moment to register that he had been interrupted. "Of course," he said. They went inside, all 3 of them, in a configuration that was not quite what Marorrow had intended. Wren went behind the counter. Harmon took the stool directly in front of her. Marorrow stood for a moment, reassessing the shape of the situation, and then took the adjacent stool with the air of a man reclaiming territory. Rex Beaumont came in with the first wave of the post-service crowd. Darrell behind him, Cody behind Darrell. They took the corner booth. They ordered. They watched. Bobby moved through the kitchen with one eye permanently on the pass-through window. Hattie Drummond came in last, alone, and took her window table, and from that position she could see everyone in the room. The first wave of families filled the diner in the particular dispersed way of people who have been sitting together and now want to separate slightly. The sound level rose. Plates moved. Coffee went out in volume. Through all of it, Wren worked the counter and the nearest tables with the same mechanical competence she had brought to every shift. She poured coffee. She recited specials. She moved. But something had changed in the frequency of the room. Something that the people who had been watching her for days could feel, and the people who hadn't been watching could not. Harmon drank his coffee and said nothing, and did not stop watching her. Marorrow was on his third cup and speaking loudly to Weiler, who had arrived and taken the stool at the far end of the counter, about the service, about the crowd, about the meaning of the day. It was the kind of speaking that is not really speaking to the person beside you, but to the room. What this town needs, Marorrow said, is people who understand what Memorial Day actually means, not just showing up, actually understanding what was sacrificed and by whom. He set his cup down. Some people use the occasion. Some people have earned the occasion. That's a real distinction. Weiler nodded. He had been nodding at things Marorrow said for 8 years, but his eyes had gone somewhere else. They had gone to his phone, where the screen was dark, where the name Carmela and the phrase, "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" were still sitting in his recent call log. He looked at the counter. He looked at Wren. He looked back at his phone. He put the phone in his pocket. It was Rex who started it. Later, nobody would have been entirely able to say why he chose that particular moment. The crowd present, the service just ended, Marorrow on the stool. Perhaps it was the audience. Perhaps it was the $200 he had already lost. Perhaps it was simply the particular restlessness of a man who needs things to be resolved and cannot tolerate the ambiguity of a woman who continues to exist without providing him an explanation. He stood up from the corner booth and raised his voice across the diner. "I want to say something," Rex said. "For the record, since we're all here and it's that kind of day." He looked at Wren. "I've been thinking about the collection money for the Memorial Service Fund, that $30 on the table." He paused. "I want to know who authorized it, because the fund has a custodian, and the custodian is standing right here." He gestured to Marorrow. "So, I want to know if that donation went through proper channels, or if it just disappeared." It was a fabricated accusation without any real specificity, and everyone in the room understood it was a fabricated accusation, and nobody said so. Marorrow looked at Rex with a small nod, the expression of a man whose lieutenant has done exactly what he was expected to do. "That's a fair question," Marorrow said. "Accountability matters, especially when we're dealing with funds meant to honor the people this community has lost." He turned on his stool to face Wren directly. "You want to explain where that money went?" Wren set down the coffee pot on the counter. Slow, deliberate, she turned. "The $30 is in May's register," she said. "Accounted for. If you want the receipt, she can print it." "That's not what I'm asking," Marorrow said. "I'm asking about your intentions, your character, about whether someone like you, someone who has no investment in this community, no record here, no nothing, whether someone like you should be handling money connected to a veterans memorial at all." The diner had gone quiet, the particular quiet of a room that understands something is happening. Gerald Pruitt had turned on his stool to face Marorrow's back. Harmon set down his coffee cup. Wren looked at Marorrow across the counter. Her expression was the same as it had been every day in this room. Flat, controlled, unreadable. But something had entered her stillness that had not been there before. A quality of waiting. The way a room sounds different in the second before a door opens. "What would satisfy you?" she said. "Specifically." Marorrow stood from his stool. "I think you should leave this service to people who understand what it means. I think you should leave this community to people who have earned their place in it. I think—" He stepped forward. "I think you should leave." He put his hand on her shoulder to turn her toward the door. What happened next happened fast. Not violently. There was no violence in it, and that was somehow the most startling thing about it. Marorrow's hand closed on her left shoulder, and he pulled, and the force of the pull combined with the relative angle of her body meant that her shoulder turned and her collar pulled with it, and the fabric of her work shirt, stretched already from days of physical labor, worn thin at the seams, gave at the shoulder seam with a sound like a dry twig. The left shoulder of the shirt tore open, and on Wren Calloway's upper left arm, just below the shoulder, the hush of the October morning fell over May's diner like a physical thing. The tattoo was not subtle. It was not something that could be misidentified or explained away by anyone who had any reason to know what it meant. It covered the upper arm in the deliberate, permanent way of something that was never meant to be hidden, so much as simply not displayed. A golden eagle clutching a trident anchor and a flintlock pistol crossed over by a lightning bolt. Beneath the eagle, in precise block lettering, 2 lines. The first, a designation number. The second, the letters that anyone with 28 years of naval special warfare experience would recognize in the dark. DEAD. TEVGRU, Task Force Blue. The room did not react immediately. There were exactly 3 seconds, 3 full, measurable seconds, in which the diner was simply a room containing people who had seen something they had not yet finished processing. In the first second, Hattie Drummond put both hands over her mouth. In the second second, Bobby Crane's phone came out of his pocket and his thumb hit the screen. In the third second, Reed Harmon stood up from his counter stool. He did not stand the way a man stands when he is surprised. He stood the way a man stands when something he suspected has been confirmed, and he has already decided what to do about it. He stood straight, shoulders square, chin level, and he brought his right hand up in a salute that was not a ceremony salute, not the casual raising of the hand at a flag or a superior officer at a distance. It was the salute you give when you are looking directly at the person you are saluting, and you want them to understand the full weight of what you are communicating. Held, deliberate, complete. The VFW men near the door recognized it before they knew why. One of them straightened, then another. Marorrow stood with his hand still half extended in the space where Wren's shoulder had been before the fabric tore, and he was looking at the tattoo, and the color was leaving his face in the visible, measurable way that blood leaves a face when the brain cannot reconcile what the eyes are providing. "Petty Officer First Class Wren Calloway," Harmon said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group, 36 confirmed combat operations across 4 theaters, the last of which was in Kandahar Province on August 12, 2015, at 1700 hours. He paused. One of 6 women to complete basic underwater demolition and SEAL training without interruption. The first of those 6 to achieve Tier 1 operational status. The room had the particular quality of air in a space where something has shifted so fundamentally that the molecules themselves seem to require a moment to rearrange. Rex Beaumont was standing beside the corner booth with his mouth slightly open. His hand had gone to the back of his neck. He was doing the specific thing people do when they have said something in a room that they very badly wish to unsay. Travis Keene at the counter had put both hands flat on the surface in front of him and was staring at the counter surface. He was thinking, very clearly and with great precision, about the afternoon he had called her out in front of a crowd with a broken gun, and about the 12 seconds in which she had diagnosed it without touching it, and about the expression on her face during those 12 seconds, which he had filed at the time under unreadable, and was now filing under something else entirely. Daryl had stood up from the corner booth. He was not sure why. He had simply found himself standing. At her window table, Hattie Drummond had lowered her hands from her face. Her eyes were bright. She was not crying, but she was close to it, and the emotion on her face was not pity. It was the specific emotion of a woman who has spent 63 years watching people misidentify strength, and who has just watched the misidentification corrected in a room she eats breakfast in every morning. Cade Weiler was sitting on his stool at the far end of the counter with his phone in his hand, the call log visible on the screen, Carmela's number, and the word declined, visible in the recent history. He was looking at Wren. His face had gone a particular shade that suggested his body had worked out a conclusion before his mind had caught up. Gerald Pruitt had stood from his front row chair, the one he had never occupied before today, and he was facing Wren, and he did not salute because his arm did not go above the shoulder anymore, the damage from 1972 being what it was. But he stood at the closest approximation of attention his body could manage, and that was enough. Marorrow had not moved. His hand was still in that half-extended position. His badge caught the light. His 5 rows of ribbons caught the light. His mouth was opening and closing in the specific way of a man who has been talking his entire adult life and has suddenly run out of things to say. Wren reached up and pulled the torn fabric of her shirt back over her shoulder. She did it calmly, without hurry, the way you close a door that has been left open. She looked at Marorrow. She said, "The thing you need to understand about the benefits money, Sheriff, is that I've already found it." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight, not the silence of shock that had already passed through the room. This was the silence of 22 people understanding simultaneously that a situation they thought they understood has been, in its entirety, something other than what it appeared to be. Marorrow found his voice. It came out smaller than he intended. "I don't know what the contracts for the Millhaven Mining Reserve," Wren said. She was not performing this. Her voice was the same even flat register it had been on the first morning she walked through the door and asked for the dishwashing job. Awarded to Keene County Resource Management at 14% above comparable market rates. Reviewed and approved by the county sheriff's office. She paused. The VA supplemental benefit applications submitted by 9 Millhaven veterans over the past 3 years, 3 of which were processed, 6 of which were not. The 6 that were not were signed for at the county level. Another pause. The signature on the signed for forms is yours. Marorrow's hand had come down. He was looking at her with something that had moved past shock into a colder territory. The expression of a man recalculating his options in real time. "You have no authority here," he said. "Whatever you think you—" The front door of May's Diner opened. 2 people walked in, both in civilian clothes, dark jackets, no logos, no identification visible. A man and a woman, both with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have been in rooms like this one for professional reasons before. They positioned themselves at the entrance without speaking. The man put his hands in his jacket pockets. The woman looked at Wren. Wren looked at her briefly and nodded once. Marorrow turned and saw them and went very still. "Sheriff Marorrow," the woman said. Her voice was professional and entirely without affect. "We have a federal warrant for the inspection of county administrative records related to the Millhaven Veterans Affairs processing system and the county resource extraction contracting record from 2021 to present. We'd ask that you make yourself available." She said it the way someone says something that is not actually a request. Marorrow looked at the 2 people by the door. He looked at Weiler, who had risen from his stool at the end of the counter and was standing with the uncertain posture of a man who has just realized that every decision he made in the past week was, in retrospect, the wrong one. He looked at Wren. He said very quietly, "How long have you been here?" 9 days, Wren said. "You made it easy." Rex Beaumont sat down in the corner booth. Not because he decided to, his knees simply did it for him. The 2 federal investigators moved through the room with professional efficiency, and Marorrow went with them. Not in handcuffs, not yet, but with the hollow compliance of a man whose authority has been revoked so completely that even the decision to resist requires a self-regard he no longer possesses. Weiler followed, holding the specific posture of a man who has decided that cooperation is the most prudent path available and is gripping that decision with both hands. The families who had come in for post-service lunch finished their coffees and found quiet reasons to leave. What remained in May's Diner in the minutes after the departure was the particular silence of a room that has been through something and is deciding how to be on the other side of it. Rex Beaumont sat in the corner booth for a long time. Daryl and Cody had both found something to look at that was not Rex's face. The grin that Rex had worn through every exchange in this diner over the past 9 days, the grin of a man performing for an audience he trusted, was gone with a completeness that left his face looking unfamiliar, like a room after the furniture has been moved out, and you see for the first time how small the walls actually are. He thought about the $200 he had bet. He thought about the $30 on the table. He thought about standing up in this room 20 minutes ago and raising his voice and making an accusation about the memorial fund that he had known was fabricated when he made it. And he thought about the 7 photographs on the stage outside. Real names, real people, real cost. And about the word Harmon had said, operations, and the number, 36, and the phrase, combat theaters. He sat with all of it in the corner booth, and the corner booth, which had always been his stage, felt smaller than it ever had. He did not apologize. He was not, in that moment, capable of the kind of apology the situation required, but the sitting with it was at least the beginning of something. Whether he would continue with it once he left the diner was a different question, and not one anyone could answer for him. Travis Keene was still at the counter with both hands flat on the surface in front of him. He was thinking about a specific moment, the 2 seconds she had looked at the Beretta from 4 feet away. He was thinking about the 12 seconds it would have taken her to disassemble it. He was thinking about 36 operations and 4 theaters, and about the fact that a person does not reach those numbers through administrative support roles, and about the calluses on her hands that he had seen when she set the coffee down in front of him on the second day. The specific location and texture of calluses that form from years of grip training, not from dishes. He had called her out in a room full of people. He had done it to perform, and he had been shown the performance for what it was, and the showing had been done without a word addressed directly to him, which was worse than any confrontation could have been. He put money on the counter and left without speaking. At the door he paused. He did not turn around. He stood in the frame for a moment with the October light behind him. Then he left. Cade Weiler returned 20 minutes after departing, alone. He came in and stood just inside the door and looked at May, then at the counter, then at Wren. "The redaction code's on the file," he said. "When Carmela told me to leave it alone, I should have looked harder at why." He stopped. He was trying to say something that did not have a clean form. "I should have done more with what I knew." "Yes," Wren said. The word landed without softening, and Weiler received it without flinching, which was perhaps the only honest thing he could do. "The 9 veterans' files," he said. "Whatever access I have, I'll make it available to the investigators, all of it." "They have your contact information," Wren said. "They'll be in touch." He nodded. He looked at the space where Marorrow's coffee cup had been on the counter. Then he turned and walked out. And nobody in the room watched him go, because there was a difference between someone leaving in disgrace and someone leaving while trying to do the correct thing, and this was the second, and it deserved the small dignity of not being watched. Gerald Pruitt, still on his stool, said into the quiet that followed. "She knew, from the beginning." "Yes," May said from behind the counter. "The dishwashing job wasn't about the dishwashing." May looked at the stack of dish towels beside the sink. Military fold, corners tucked, the same as they had been every day for 9 days. "The dishwashing job was about getting inside a room that nobody thought mattered," she said. "Nobody watches the person at the sink." Gerald looked at the dish towels for a long moment. He turned his coffee cup. 3 years of paperwork," he said. 9 days of dishes," May said. He sat with that. He picked up his coffee and finished it, and set the cup down with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has arrived somewhere. "That's a fair trade," he said. Hattie Drummond, at her window table, had been listening to all of it. She was looking at the square where the flag was still moving in the October wind. And she was thinking about Harold sitting with his back to the wall for 30 years, and about the woman who had done the same thing in this room for 9 days. She was thinking that there are 2 kinds of people who carry things from the places they have been. The first kind carries the weight visibly, where others can see it, and this is its own form of courage. The second kind carries it behind the breastbone, out of sight, attending to the business in front of them without announcement. She had been married to the first kind. She had recognized the second kind across a diner the moment the woman sat down with her back to the wall. She stood. She buttoned her coat. At the door, she turned. "The coin she left," she said to May. "She'll want it back, eventually." May looked at her. "You think she's coming back?" "People who are truly done with a place don't look back when they leave," Hattie said. She looked back. She opened the door. The October wind came in, cool and dry. "That means something." The door closed. The bell rang once, small and clear. May stood behind the counter for a moment, turning the challenge coin in her hands, feeling the weight of what had passed through her diner in 9 days without announcing itself. Then she put the coin in her apron pocket and went back to work. Bobby lowered his phone. He had recorded 3 minutes of footage from the moment the shirt tore to the moment the investigators walked through the door. Clear, steady, the tattoo visible, Harmon's voice audible, Marorrow's face at the moment of understanding, all captured in uninterrupted sequence. His phone buzzed. A text from a number not in his contacts. 6 words. "If you really want to serve, don't." Bobby stared at the message. He looked at the room. He looked at Wren, who was behind the counter doing what she had done every single day since she walked through that door. Organizing, aligning, moving through the space with the economy of motion he now understood completely. He looked back at his phone. He deleted the footage. He put the phone in his pocket and picked up a bus tub and went back to work. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor. Whether you're building discipline in the field or building the life you've worked for, preparation is everything. Visit the link in the description and use code WARRIOR for an exclusive discount. Now, back to Millhaven. Gerald Pruitt was still at his stool when the room had cleared, and May brought him a fresh coffee without being asked, and he sat with it for a long time without drinking it. When Wren came past with a bus tub, he said, without preamble, 3 years. She stopped. 3 years I filed that paperwork. Every time I thought I'd hit a wall by accident, turned out I'd hit a wall by design. He looked at his cup. I stopped believing anybody was going to fix it. Wren set the bus tub down on the counter. I know, she said. Gerald looked up at her. There was something in his face. Not gratitude exactly, because gratitude would have implied he thought he was owed an apology, and he had stopped expecting those a long time ago. It was something quieter and more specific. The expression of a man who has been carrying something heavy and has been told he can set it down. The others, he said. The other 8. The investigators have the names, Wren said. All 9 files have been flagged. The review will take 6 to 8 weeks. After that, she paused, choosing words carefully. After that, the disbursements should move. Gerald nodded, slowly. He picked up his coffee and held it in both hands. Your husband served Navy, Wren said. She had not meant to say it. It came out before the control caught it. Gerald looked up. You're Harold, he said. No. She paused. I meant the way she talks about him. Hattie. The way she describes how he carried it. A long silence. I recognized it. Gerald looked at her for a moment, with the kind of direct attention that veterans give each other sometimes. Not sympathy, not analysis, but recognition. The simple acknowledgement of a shared weight. He'd have liked you, Gerald said. Wren picked up her bus tub. I'll take that, she said, and moved on. Harmon was waiting for her at the back of the diner when the lunch crowd had fully cleared. He was sitting in the booth farthest from the window, facing the door, both hands around a coffee cup. She came and sat across from him without being invited. They sat in silence for a moment, the way people sit who have been in places where silence was a survival tool and have never entirely stopped treating it that way. How did they get you to do this? He said finally. Not accusatory, genuinely curious. They asked, she said. There are people with federal authority who could have done this in a week with warrants. There are, she said. But evidence gathered from the inside of a community by someone the community trusts, or, in this case, doesn't trust, is different evidence. It holds differently. She turned her coffee cup on the table. 9 days of shifts. I have documented interactions, recorded observations, and 3 weeks of prior surveillance from a separate operative that laid the groundwork. She paused. The picture was already built. I just put the frame on it. Harmon looked at her. How long since you've slept in an actual bed? I sleep fine, she said. That's not what I asked. Something passed across her face. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of what one might look like on her. I sleep fine on cots, she said. 8 years of cots. You've been out for 4. I sleep fine on civilian cots. He looked at her steadily. Are you all right? The question arrived in the space between them, and Wren received it the way she received most direct questions, without flinching, without deflecting, but taking a moment before she answered, as if she were checking the answer for accuracy before releasing it. I'm operational, she said. Harmon held her gaze. That's not what I asked either. Another pause. Outside, the October wind had picked up, moving through the square, where the bunting was still strung between the lampposts, where the 7 photographs were still displayed on the stage. A child's laugh came through the wall, high and brief and clean. I'm working on it, Wren said. Harmon nodded. He seemed to find this a satisfactory answer, not because it was reassuring, but because it was honest. The next assignment, he said, 3 options. I was asked to present them to you. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet. Standard paper, no letterhead. He set it on the table face down. By who? She said. You know by who. She looked at the folded paper, did not pick it up. I got here 9 days ago and asked for a dishwashing job, she said. Give me the day. Harmon looked at her for a moment. Then he stood, left exact change on the table for the coffee, and buttoned his jacket. You've got the day, he said. The paper will keep. He walked out of the diner, and through the window she watched him cross the square in his civilian clothes, past the stage and the photographs and the flag that was still moving in the wind, and he did not look back. Wren sat alone in the back booth for a while. The folded paper was on the table in front of her, and she had not touched it. From the kitchen, she could hear Bobby running water and the small rhythmic sound of his work. May was in the back doing inventory, the scratch of her pen audible through the wall. The diner was quiet in this specific way. It was quiet in the hour between lunch and dinner. A temporary pause, not an absence. The breathing space between performances. She looked at the paper. She thought about Kandahar province in August 2015 at 1700 hours, which was the last time she had been in a place where being good at what she was good at had mattered in a way that other people could see. She thought about the years since, which had been filled with the kind of work that was done in rooms that did not make it into official records, and in places that did not make it onto maps that civilians owned. And she thought about how the work had been good, and the cost of it had been real, and both of those things were true simultaneously, and always would be. She thought about Gerald Pruitt and his 3 years of paperwork, and his 8 companions in the same paperwork trap, and the particular expression on his face when she told him the review would move. She thought about Hattie, who had sat down beside her at the counter and said Harold always sat with his back to the wall, and who had meant it as recognition, and who had been right. She picked up the folded paper. She unfolded it, 3 locations, each with a single line of context beside it. She read them once, then twice, then set the paper flat on the table and looked at it without reading it a third time because she had already decided. She had decided before she unfolded it. May came out of the back at 3:40 p.m. to find Wren at the counter, apron folded in a neat rectangle on the surface beside the stacked menus. Beside the apron, a challenge coin, bronze, worn smooth on the face side where it had been held, the reverse etched with markings that May did not know how to read, and beside that, $30, bills flat, corners aligned. For the fund, Wren said. May looked at the arrangement on the counter. She looked at Wren, who had her pack on one shoulder and her jacket zipped and her boots laced, and was, in every visible way, the same woman who had walked through the door 9 days ago, except for the quality in her eyes, which had always been there, but which May understood now she had been only partially seeing before. "You're leaving," May said. It was not a question. "Lunch cleanup is done. Bobby handled the back." May looked at her for a long moment. "Where are you going?" Wren looked at her without expression. "West," she said. May looked at the challenge coin on the counter. She looked at the apron folded with military precision. She looked at the woman who had slept on her cot and in her back booth, and who had, for 9 days, been the best dishwasher she had ever had, and she said, "Come back if you need a cot." Something moved in Wren's face, brief, genuine, the closest thing to open that May had seen on her. "Thank you for the job," Wren said. May nodded. She picked up the challenge coin and turned it over in her hands, reading the reverse. She looked up. Wren was already at the door. Bobby was coming through the kitchen pass-through with a stack of clean sheet pans when the bell above the front door rang. He looked up. The door was closing. Through the front window, he could see Wren crossing the diner's small parking lot with her pack on her shoulder, moving at the same pace she moved through everything. No hurry, no hesitation. The absolute economy of motion that he now understood was not a personality trait, but the residue of years. He went to the door. He pushed it open. "Hey," he called. She turned. He was standing in the doorway of May's diner with a stack of sheet pans in his arms, and she was standing in the parking lot with a pack on her shoulder. And there was a wind moving between them, and he looked at her and tried to think of something to say that was large enough for the situation and came up with nothing. So he said the true thing, which was, "Are you going to come back?" She looked at him for a moment, and what happened on her face in that moment was not a smile exactly. It was what happened to a face when a smile has been trained out of it, but the underlying thing that would have been a smile has not been. A softening. A brief permission. She turned and walked toward the truck, parked at the far end of the lot. Bobby watched her go. He watched the truck start. He watched it pull out of the lot and onto the county road and head west, past the cactus and the flat horizon and the October light that was going amber at the edges. And he stood in the doorway of May's diner, holding a stack of sheet pans until the truck was gone. Then he went back inside and put the pans away and picked up a dish towel and started on the dinner prep. At 5:15 p.m., Harmon was sitting in a corner booth at the diner drinking his third coffee of the day when May came over and set down the challenge coin on the table in front of him. He looked at it. He picked it up and turned it over, reading the reverse, and then he held it in his palm with the same weight a person gives a thing that has been carried for a long time. "She left this," May said. "I know. Does she do that? Leave things?" Harmon looked at the coin. "No," he said. "Not usually." May refilled his coffee without being asked. She stood for a moment, looking out the front window at the square, where the bunting was still up, and the 7 photographs were still displayed, and the flag was still moving in the early evening wind. She said she was going west, May said. West is a direction, Harmon said. Not a destination. May looked at him. Is she all right? He turned the coin over in his fingers again, held it. The same gesture Wren had used with it in the storage room on the first night. The same gesture she had probably used with it in 100 different rooms, in 100 different countries, in the dark. She said she was working on it, he said. He set the coin on the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he slid it back toward May. She meant for you to have it, he said. May looked at the coin. She picked it up and held it in both hands, and she looked at the reverse, and her eyes stayed on the 2 lines of text below the eagle for a long time. Service doesn't seek recognition. She closed her hand around it. The Federal Review of Millhaven County's administrative records took 7 weeks. On the 49th day, Gerald Pruitt received a letter from the VA regional office confirming the reopening of his supplemental benefit application and the issuance of a formal review, finding that the previous processing failures had been the result of systemic administrative obstruction at the county level. The letter used careful language. Between the careful language was the plain fact. Someone had been deliberately sitting on his paperwork, and that someone was no longer in a position to do so. Gerald sat at his counter stool in May's diner and read the letter twice, and then he folded it into thirds and put it in his jacket pocket, and he sat with his coffee for a while. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Hattie Drummond, at her window table, saw him fold the letter and understood what it meant, and she turned back to the window and looked at the square where the bunting was long gone, and the stage was disassembled, and the October light had been replaced by the early gray of November. She thought about Harold, who had come home from a war and sat with his back to the wall for 30 years, and about the woman who had walked into May's diner with a pack on her shoulder and done the same thing, and about the difference between the two of them, which was not the quality of what they had carried, but the question of whether the carrying had been finished or was still underway. She thought about what Wren had said, standing at the counter with her coffee cup, working on it. She thought that this was, in the end, the only honest answer any person could give to that question, and that the giving of it was its own kind of courage. 3 counties to the west, on a 2-lane highway running through flat country under a November sky, a truck with no distinguishing plates moved at steady speed past a gas station, a grain elevator, a water tower painted with the name of a town she had not been to before. The phone on the seat buzzed. Wren picked it up without looking away from the road. A text. Coordinates. Below the coordinates, 4 words. When you're ready, no rush. She read it once. She set the phone back on the seat without responding. On the seat beside the phone, the folded paper Harmon had left on the table. Open now. One of the 3 location lines circled in the margins with a pen she carried in the outside pocket of her pack. The circle was clean and deliberate, the same quality of motion as everything else she did. She had decided before she made the circle. She had made the circle because decisions, in her experience, were not real until they were written. The highway ran straight ahead of her through flat country and empty air, and she drove, and the November light was thin and silver and fell across everything without distinction. The road, the fields, the long horizon, the way light falls on things that do not require explanation. In the truck bed, nothing, just the truck and the pack and the map she had not needed to open in 9 days because she had already known the layout of every room she had been in. And on the floor of the cab, where she could reach it without looking, a folded strip of cloth containing a small object the size of a $50 coin. She had not put it back in the pack. She had put it where she could reach it. That was new. She drove west. The road kept going. Back in Millhaven, at 4:57 p.m. on a Tuesday in late November, Bobby Crane was wiping down the counter after the dinner rush when May came and stood beside him and set the challenge coin on the surface in front of him. He looked at it. She left it for me, May said. I'm leaving it for you. Bobby looked at the coin for a moment. He picked it up and turned it over and read the reverse. He set it back down. He picked it up again and held it the way you hold something when you are deciding what it means, which is carefully, with both options open. She's not coming back, he said. May looked at him. She said she was working on it. Bobby closed his hand around the coin. He looked out the front window at the square, where the November dark was coming down clean and cold, and the lampposts were lit, and the spot where the stage had been was empty now, just concrete and the memory of it. He thought about his uncle, who had come back from Fallujah and gone quiet in a way that sounded different from regular quietness. He thought about 36 confirmed combat operations and 4 theaters, and the way a person looks when they have been in places where the cost of things is measured in a currency that does not convert to anything you can spend here. He thought about what it would mean to go somewhere and do something that nobody would know about and nobody would see and nobody would understand from the outside, and to come back from it, and to keep going. He put the coin in his jacket pocket. He went back to the counter and finished wiping it down, corners to corners, each pass overlapping the last by exactly the width of his wrist. He noticed what he was doing. He stopped. He thought about it for a long time. Then he kept going, not because he had learned it from her, but because he had been watching her do it for 9 days and had understood something about why. Because when you are in a space, you take care of it. Because attention to the small things is how you demonstrate that you are paying attention to the large ones. Because the counter in front of you is the mission you have right now, and the mission you have right now is the one that counts. He finished the counter, he folded the dish towel, corners tucked, precise. He set it on the stack beside the sink. He looked at it for a moment. Outside, the November dark had come all the way down, and the lampposts were doing their job, and the square was empty and quiet and waiting, the way places wait when the people who understand their importance are somewhere else. The phone in Bobby's pocket buzzed. He took it out. A text from a number he did not recognize, no area code he had seen before. There are 3 open files in the Millhaven record, things that didn't make the Federal Review. If you find them, send them to this number. Bobby read the message twice. He looked at May, who was in the back and couldn't see him. He looked at the door of the diner and the window beside it, and the empty square beyond the window. He thought about what Wren had said when he asked if it bothered her. Yes. No elaboration, no performance. Just the honest answer, and then the apron back on and the work continuing. He typed back, "Who are you?" The reply came in 4 seconds. Someone working on it. Bobby held the phone in his hand for a long time, in the quiet of the closing diner. Then he went to the cabinet under the register, where May kept the physical copies of the county filings. The ones that came in by mail, the paper trail that predated the digital system. And he started looking. He was not sure what he was looking for. The message had said 3 open files in the Millhaven record, things that didn't make the Federal Review. He ran his fingers along the folders in the cabinet, reading the tab labels by the diner's overhead light, and he thought about what he knew and what he didn't, and what the gap between those 2 things contained. The folders were organized chronologically, which meant they were organized the way May organized everything, precisely, efficiently, without room for ambiguity. Bobby moved through them slowly. County maintenance contracts, 2018 through present. Vendor agreements, staff permits. He almost closed the cabinet. Then his fingers stopped on a folder that was thinner than the others and had no tab label. Just a strip of masking tape with a date written in pencil. October 2019. He pulled it out. Inside, 3 pages, printed on county letterhead, with a signature block at the bottom of each. The signature was Marorrow's. The content was a series of authorization letters, not for contracts, not for administrative processing, but for property access. 3 properties in Millhaven County, designated for resource survey access, authorized to a company name Bobby did not recognize. The properties were each described with their legal land descriptions, and Bobby was not a surveyor, but he had grown up in this county and he knew the land the way a person knows a face. By instinct, not by description. And the 3 parcels in these letters were not adjacent to the mining reserve that the Federal Review had examined. They were something else entirely. He took photos of all 3 pages with his phone. He sent them to the number that had texted him. The reply came in 11 seconds. Not words, just a single character. A check mark. Bobby put the folder back. He put the cabinet back the way it was. He went back to the counter and stood there for a moment, looking at the dish towel Wren had left folded on the stack. Military fold. Corners tucked. Precise. He thought about what it meant to sit with your back to the wall and your eyes to the door and do the work in front of you without explaining yourself to anyone. He put on his jacket and turned off the kitchen lights and picked up his keys. At the door, he paused. He looked back at the diner, the empty booths, the cleaned counter, the dish towels in their precise stack, the challenge coin on the shelf where May had moved it. He looked at the coin. He looked at the door. He went out, and the bell above the door rang once behind him, small and clear in the cold November night. 43 miles northwest of Millhaven, the truck with no distinguishing plates was pulled over on the shoulder of a two-lane highway. Not because of engine trouble, not because of any external reason. Just pulled over, engine running, headlights cutting through the flat November dark. Wren sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel and did not drive. On the seat beside her, the folded paper with the circled location, the cracked phone with the text she had not replied to, the strip of cloth with the coin inside it. She looked at the road ahead. The headlights reached about 200 feet, and then the darkness took over completely. And beyond the 200 feet was the same flat country continuing in the same direction, indistinguishable from itself. She had been stopped here for 6 minutes. She was thinking about Gerald Pruitt's face when she told him the review would move. The specific expression of a man who had been carrying something heavy for 3 years and had just been told he could set it down. She was thinking about what it cost to carry something for 3 years while the person responsible for the weight walked around free in the same town, and what it meant to still be there after 3 years, and what kind of stubbornness that required, and whether stubbornness was the right word for it. She thought about Bobby in the kitchen, watching her through the pass-through window every day for 9 days. She thought about what he had said. The ones who really saw things don't talk about it because it doesn't fit in regular talking, and about the fact that a 17-year-old had articulated something that most people spent decades not managing to articulate, and about what that meant for where he was going. She thought about Hattie Drummond and the words Harold always sat with his back to the wall. She thought about the 31 years Hattie had watched Harold carry something that couldn't be put down, and how she had recognized in a stranger across a diner the shape of the same weight, and how she had walked over and sat down beside her and said it plainly, without preamble, without asking permission. She thought that this was perhaps the bravest thing she had witnessed in 9 days in Millhaven, Texas. She let go of the steering wheel. She reached to the seat beside her and picked up the strip of cloth. She unrolled it. The coin sat in her palm. Dev grew on the reverse, the eagle face up, worn smooth where her thumb had run across it more times than she could count. She had left it on May's counter. She was not sure exactly why she had taken it back out of the pack before she left. She thought it might be what Hattie had said. She'll want it back eventually. She didn't know if she agreed with that. She knew that she had put it within reach. She rolled it back in the cloth. She put it in the cup holder. She picked up the phone and looked at the unanswered text. "When you're ready, no rush." She typed 3 days. She put the phone down. She put the truck in drive and pulled back onto the highway and drove northwest in the dark, and behind her, Millhaven's lights were visible on the flat horizon for another 7 minutes before the distance erased them, and she did not check the rearview mirror when they went. The federal review completed on the 49th day, and Gerald Pruitt received his letter. The letter from the VA used careful language. Between the careful language was the plain fact. The obstruction had been systematic. The responsible party had been identified, and the processing failure had been corrected at the source. All 9 veterans received similar letters within 6 days of Gerald's. The county resource contracting irregularities resulted in 3 separate administrative proceedings. 2 council members resigned, the 3rd contested and lost. The contracting company connected to the authorization letters in the October 2019 folder. The folder Bobby had found turned out to have connections to an out-of-county operation that had been on a federal watch list for a year and a half. The 3 parcels in the authorization letters were added to an existing federal investigation as supplemental evidence. Nobody publicly connected this supplemental evidence to May's diner, or to a woman who had worked there for 9 days. Nobody who needed to make that connection did not make it. In May's diner, in the weeks after, some things changed and some things didn't. May was still there at 6 a.m. Gerald Pruitt was still on his stool by 11:40. The dish towels were still folded the same way because May had started folding them that way after the first week and had not stopped. Bobby Crane started coming in early on Tuesdays and staying late, and he developed the habit of sitting at the back booth, the one Wren had slept in, with a cup of coffee and a notebook, writing things down. Nobody asked what he was writing. May assumed it was homework. It was not homework. He had replied to 2 more texts from the unknown number. Both had contained questions about things in Millhaven that required local knowledge to answer. He had answered them. He had not been told what the answers were used for, and he had understood that this was deliberate, and he had decided that this was acceptable. One evening in December, sitting in the back booth with his notebook and his coffee, he looked up and found Hattie Drummond at the adjacent table, reading a paperback, her coat still on, as if she had just come in. "You've been sitting in her spot," Hattie said, without looking up from her book. "Yes," Bobby said. Hattie turned a page. "Good," she said. They sat in the comfortable silence of two people who have understood the same thing and do not need to compare notes on the understanding. The diner was warm, the November dark pressed against the windows. From the kitchen came the sound of May's radio, turned low. After a while, Bobby said, "Do you think she knows what she started here?" Hattie looked up from her book. She looked at the back booth, at Bobby in it, at the notebook, at the coffee cup, at the window beyond it where the square was dark and empty and waiting. "I think," Hattie said slowly, "that people who do that kind of work don't generally think in terms of what they started. They think about the work in front of them." She paused. "But yes, I think she knows." Bobby looked at his notebook. "Is that enough?" he asked. "For them, I mean, the people who do it. Is knowing enough?" Hattie was quiet for a long time, long enough that Bobby thought she wasn't going to answer. "Harold used to say," she said finally, "that the only honest answer to that question is, some days yes, some days no, and the work continues either way." She picked up her book again. "I think that's about right." Bobby wrote it down. Outside, the December wind was moving through the square, past the lampposts and the empty spot where the stage had been, across the concrete and the flat grass and the flag that was still there, smaller now in the winter light, still keeping its slow time with something none of them could name. Inside May's diner, the lights were warm. The dish towels were folded the right way. The challenge coin was on its shelf, face up, the eagle visible from across the room. And in the back booth, a 17-year-old boy with a notebook was writing things down and asking the right questions and learning, slowly and without anyone explaining it to him, what it meant to sit with your back to the wall, which was, in the end, exactly what Wren Calloway had left behind in Millhaven, Texas. Not the takedown of a crooked sheriff, not the vindication of 9 veterans, not even the investigation that was still ongoing in 3 counties to the northwest. What she had left behind was this: the small, persistent residue of someone who had done something without needing anyone to see it. The fold in the dish towel, the coin on the shelf, the boy in the booth.